Southern Indiana has many legends. There are tales about haunted places, large monsters that roam the deep forest, and a hidden treasure just waiting for someone to find it. But not just any treasure, a silver mine, filled with immense wealth, lost for over 200 years. This is one of the most amazing stories you've never heard. Southern Indiana is a mysterious landscape that's different from the rest of the state. Here you'll find deep canyons made of ancient rock and the largest known cave system in the state that's over 30 miles underground. Not to mention hundreds of square miles of dense forest with secluded places that are rarely traveled. For the last 200 years, there have been stories about Native Americans that both mined and traded silver with pioneers from a lost Southern Indiana silver mine, one that's still hidden somewhere beneath these rolling hills. There are documented stories in which Native Americans traded silver to have their grains milled or to buy rifles and other useful items. It's not a question of if there was silver, but where did it all come from? And for me, an over 40-year quest to find the truth started with just one story, handed down from generation to generation. It's a tale of immense wealth, murder, and darkness in the southern Indiana woods. I'll start at the very beginning, at a place called Hunter's Creek, on the very edge of the Hoosier National Forest. Here is the final resting place of Cora Ramsey. She was born in 1886, and she was my great-grandmother. Everyone said she was a wise woman, that she had Indian blood, and knew things. She would come to these woods in the summer and take my mother wading in the spring-fed creek. As they would wade the crystal clear water, Great-Grandma would tell stories. One of them was about the early 1800s, in which Indians blindfolded a white man and woman and put them on horseback. Their horses traveled across a plain that sounded hollow, as if a large cave was underneath. The man and woman were taken off their horses and led to a cave. Blindfolds were removed and Indians rolled away a large stone that had hidden the entrance. Once inside the cave, the two white people saw the bodies of dead tribal chiefs, dressed in their beautiful garments and adorned with colorful beads. But also, something even more astounding: treasure. There were piles of silver, gold, and even jewels. After the Indians left Indiana Territory, no one knew where the cave and treasure could be, including the man and woman. And once the story was told to my mother, both she and her brother Bob were determined to find it. And they had a pretty good idea of where they thought it was. Their father, my grandpa, had bought them a horse. And when they rode it across one certain place, it sounded very hollow, just like in the story. They were very sure that this was the place their grandma spoke about. They would find the cave, become tour guides, and become rich beyond their wildest dreams. However, the cave was never found, despite years of looking up and down hollows in the woods. If the treasure-filled Indian cave was there at Hunter's Creek, it was incredibly well hidden. As a kid, I had these crazy dreams of going to Hunter's Creek, using sonar to search for a cave, and even high explosives if that's what it took. But as years passed by, a lot of life happened, and that dream faded away into reality for decades. It was not until I went to work at Louisville, Kentucky in 2008 that my interest was again completely set on fire. I met a coworker that had collected arrowheads and legends about southern Indiana for most of his life. My great-grandmother's treasure story came up, and as I told it, his eyes lit up. I was to receive a major clue, one that would consume my life for the next 14 years. The year was 1804. John Work and his wife had moved from Pennsylvania to Indiana Territory, eventually building a federal-style home at Charlestown, Indiana. He built both grain and sawmills along 14 Mile Creek and had done very well for himself and his family. In fact, he was very well known and very prosperous. He lacked for nothing, based on his ingenuity and hard work. Even local Indian tribes brought their corn to be ground at his grain mill. But instead of giving him money for his service, they gave him something very curious. The Indians gave him silver. Some say it was silver ore, and others say it was crude silver ingots, but nonetheless, it was silver. He asked them where they got all this silver, and they told him, time after time, "We have a silver mine with enough silver to put silver horseshoes on every horse in the county." They would never tell him where this mine was. One day, John was approached by the leader of this tribe. He said that his people were sick, and the medicine man could not save them. He asked John if he could come with him to the village and perhaps determine what was making the people sick. Maybe the white man's medicine would heal them. While John was no doctor, he went to the village to see what symptoms the Indians were having. Fever, headaches, breathing problems, nausea, and pale skin. John told the chief he believed his people had malaria and gave him quinine. The medicine worked, and John won favor with the chief that would be repaid in a big way later on. In the meantime, Indiana Territory Governor William Henry Harrison was living at Vincennes in a mansion he had built known as Grouseland. Harrison was tasked by President Thomas Jefferson and then President James Madison to develop Indiana for white settlers. He began buying large tracts of land from the Native Americans that lived in southern Indiana. However, Shawnee Chief Tecumseh believed that all of Indiana Territory belonged to the Shawnees and claimed that the tribes selling the land had no right to do so. In August of 1810, Tecumseh showed up at Vincennes with 400 warriors, all of them in war paint, and said he'd come to talk with William Henry Harrison. Tecumseh and Harrison got in a tense exchange that ended in Tecumseh drawing a tomahawk and Harrison his sword. Only the sound of cocked rifles made by Harrison's men made the war party back down. But Tecumseh vowed that he would kill any chief that sold land to Harrison, and he would be back. Perhaps, seeing the writing on the wall, the Indian chief that had befriended John Work visited his home at Charlestown. He told John that he and his people would be leaving the area, but before they did, they would show John the silver mine before sealing it up. They blindfolded John and took him into the night on horseback. A part of him must have wondered if he'd ever come home alive. John noticed that they crossed several low streams along the journey, a trip that took one night and a day to get there. Finally, they reached the cave, went inside, and John's blindfold was removed. What he saw was absolutely stunning. He saw piles of silver, just as they had mentioned, but they also had piles of gold, and amazingly, piles of jewels. John was given some silver as a parting gift, and was told if he could find the mine on his own, it would be all his. The Indians blindfolded John once again, sealed the cave, and brought him back home. It must have really been something. Despite being a prosperous miller, he spent the rest of his life, practically all of his spare time, looking for the silver mine and its treasure. He looked up and down 14 Mile Creek, and in the many caves along the way, he overturned large rocks that he thought looked placed there by humans, but found nothing. He even bought land at Guinea Knob and searched it thoroughly, but came up empty-handed. However, any insights that John had were lost when he died in 1832. Some even say that his restless soul haunts the grounds where he lived and in the quiet places along 14 Mile Creek, where he still searches for an immense, hidden silver mine. But John's story was not the only one. There's also the story of Nathan Phelps, that in the early 1800s found a silver mine near what's called Round Top Knob in a heavily wooded ravine northwest of New Albany. It's said that he not only found a mine, but a crude silver smelting furnace that he and a partner used to create silver ingots from the ore. The two men made many trips to the secret silver mine, but on the last return, only Nathan came back. He claimed that his partner had been bitten by a rattlesnake and died in the woods. There was speculation that Nathan killed his partner to keep the mine's location a secret and all the silver for himself. But after the Shawnees attacked and killed every man, woman, and child at Pigeon Roost, just south of Scottsburg, Indiana, Nathan and other settlers fled the area in a panic. He ended up contracting yellow fever, but made a detailed map before he died. Many people, including his son, tried to find the silver mine, but were unsuccessful. There's also a legend that says an Indian carved a bow and arrow on a tree, with the arrow pointing toward the cleverly hidden mine, but wherever that insight is, has been lost. And then there's Josiah Haight, a Charlestown resident that made counterfeit coins from an unknown source of silver. Knowing that authorities had found him out, Josiah left the area and was never seen again. But perhaps the most intriguing artifact is an 1812 document by Joseph Paddock addressed to the United States State Department. He requested both a land lease and the permission to create United States silver coins from a discovered silver mine. While the request was denied, the directions to the mine itself are missing. But more clues and stories filling the gaps of my great-grandmother's account were literally just down the road. If you drive around Clark and Floyd counties, you'll find that the silver mine legend is still alive and well, but thinly veiled by the past. Silver Creek was so named somewhere between 1776 and 1782. The creek meanders through Clark and Floyd counties, with legends about a secret silver mine along its banks. There's a Silver Creek Elementary, middle school, high school, park, and even a Beagle Club. On the western edge of New Albany is an area that was called Silver Hills, so named as people believed a silver mine was somewhere in the hills. Not to mention the Silver Hills Trolley that was also named after the legend. Going far west to Lawrence County is Silverville, also named after the legend. It's said that an Indian befriended a man and took him to a silver mine somewhere between present-day Silverville and Shoals, Indiana. When the Indian left for a time, the white man went back to the mine to steal the silver. He was found murdered, his throat cut from ear to ear, and the Indian was never seen again. When I searched the library catalogs and internet for clues, I found many more intriguing things. It's well documented that Native Americans were actively mining in southern Indiana, even in prehistoric times. At Wyandotte Cave, in Crawford County, they mined both aragonite and chert. The chert they mined, deep inside the cave, was a very fine grade, found nowhere else in North America, now known as Wyandotte chert. It was fashioned into arrowheads and other tools, and traded as far away as the East Coast. In fact, Wyandotte chert tools have been found in archaeological digs all along the eastern seaboard. Also insightful is that Native Americans were capable of moving things over very large distances via waterways. As I studied legends about the silver mine, I started seeing an odd pattern. It went west, and in a nearly perfect straight line. And there was a reason. High above New Albany stands a subtle clue at a place called Buffalo Art Park. The park has two large limestone buffalo as a memorial to the Buffalo Trace, an ancient buffalo migratory path. The path was flattened down by the large beast so well the Native Americans and pioneers that followed them used it as an early highway to travel across Indiana. The path was huge, covering hundreds of miles. While a silver mine couldn't move, the silver mined from one could be. And all along the Buffalo Trace were plenty of good hiding places in the form of caves. As I traveled across 150, the former Buffalo Trace, I noticed several small streams that John Work might have crossed with the Indians on the night they took him to the silver mine. Perhaps I really was on the right track. One compelling clue was the town of Galena. The town was named after a very specific metal, one that always occurs naturally with silver. Just below Greenville was another part of the silver mine legend that happened in an old farmstead. An Indian who had came from out west approached a farmer and asked if he could dig. When asked why, he said, "Below the ground is enough silver to shoot every horse in the county." This was exactly what the Indians had told John Work. The farmer agreed, and the Indians started digging. More Indians came that evening to assist. A big fire and feast was had, with what seemed like a large ceremony. By the next morning, the Indian told the farmer that they'd found what they were looking for, and left. The farmer found nothing but a large empty hole in the ground, as if something had once been hidden there. The Indian and his tribe were never seen again. Underneath the old farm is a spring, with water supplied from a deep underground cavern. There's also a deep ravine just west of the farm. Whether this is where a glacier left silver or not is unclear. Or perhaps it's just one place where the silver was hidden along the Buffalo Trace. Just north of 150 at Palmyra, local legends speak of Little Goss Cave. Throughout its known history, it's been known as a place of bandits. It's where the Reno gang hid stolen loot, and where Indians rode their horses into the cave, presumably to hide treasure. Bear Creek flows to the cave from the east, and Indian mounds are nearby. It was definitely a cave known to Native Americans. On private property and closely guarded today, many local people have entered the cave in their youth. It's been explored thoroughly for any clue to hidden treasure by wide-eyed kids and adults for generations. There is a place in the back where you can drop a rock and it will not hit the bottom for a long time. It is respectably deep. The cave has an upper level overlooking the lower entrance, a place for a lookout. No treasure has ever been found at Little Goss Cave. However, I was less interested in the cave and more in the symbols chiseled in rock near the entrance of the cave. A horseshoe, star, footprint, left handprint, arrow, and a circle have been identified. It's uncertain if these were left by bored teenagers in summers past, were clues left by 1800s outlaws, or was some kind of significant Indian code telling where the treasure was taken. Following Highway 150 along the old Buffalo Trace, you pass Buffalo Trace Park like a landmark on a treasure map. The stories I'd collected were all leading down a single road to a place filled with ancient, hidden caves above the White River. The adventure had only began. Shoals, Indiana is an ancient place. Artifacts have been found, suggesting the area has been inhabited by Native Americans for thousands of years. For a fact, no place in Indiana has as many treasure stories. The terrain is very unusual and exotic for Indiana, adding mystique and perhaps credibility to these tales. There are caves to explore on both sides of White River, and some of the strangest rock formations you'll find in the Midwest. Shoals would turn out to be the most dangerous part of my entire adventure. Shoals was officially platted in 1844, but French explorers and trappers had made use of the area well before that. The most famous landmark is the Jug Rock, the largest freestanding table rock east of the Mississippi River. Early pioneers thought it looked like a jug with a stopper on the top. It's the mascot for the high school. And the student body are called the Jug Rocks. Pictures and video of Jug Rock do not do it justice. It's a massive 42 feet tall and made out of ancient sandstone. Native Americans certainly knew about it, but what religious importance or rituals associated with it are unknown. I started off on the west side of the White River, along West River Road, guided by many legends that I'd read. One story said the Indians stole a keg of gold coins and hid it somewhere in the hills. Some say it was gold nuggets from the Choctaw Indians. Another said they possessed silver, gold, jewels, and a curious gold statue, all of which were from a much older, ancient culture, similar to the Mayans in Central America. But the prevalent story is that somewhere, still hidden in the woods, was a vast silver mine, a cave so big that the Indians rode their horses into it. And pulling it all together was the compelling story of William H. Smith. Back in 2002, William wrote an online article about his younger days in Martin County, following the treasure legends and exploring all over this area. Back in the late 1960s, he and his friend Lloyd took these stories and their metal detectors and methodically looked for clues. They investigated the Native American rock shelters. High up and on top of the bluffs. They jumped into many caves, and they actually found something. In William's essay, he presented several interesting pictures that guided the way to his discovery. The first picture showed a large rocky outcrop, also known as the Pinnacle. It was relatively easy to find, as it was the largest thing along the river. He also noted a large cave, big enough for Indians to ride their horses into it. And when I found it, the adrenaline in my blood set my heart pounding. It was absolutely gigantic, with an opening about 20 feet tall. I got a true sense of the excitement that William and Lloyd must have felt when they saw it. But with all the graffiti I found, it was far from being a secret. This was a kid hangout. You could easily have a fire in the center, and the smoke would exit in the top, just like a teepee. To the left was a narrow passage that led up and to the outside. In the center was a rock. I later found out that this place was once used to play illegal card games, with gamblers arriving by boat from up and down the river. I investigated the left passage, but it only led to a water-filled passage with debris. To the right led to a dry area, and then going left met with the same wet passage. If the Indians ever had treasure here, it's been gone for a long time, and there were no special symbols. I found another house rock along the river. but it was not nearly as large. If I was to find anything significant, it would have to be somewhere hard to find. I proceeded toward McBride's Bluff in pursuit of William's two biggest finds. His picture clearly showed a smaller cave opening, and what excited me about that was that it made me think about my great-grandmother's story with a stone in front of the entrance. I drove down McBride's Bluff, beating my car and my body to death on the rough road. But for the life of me, I couldn't find the cave. And then, I got a huge stroke of luck. I drove past a small cabin, in what looked like a cave for a garage. It was like something out of the Flintstones. The place belonged to a man named Charlie Pruitt. He lived in this area his entire life, and he was in his 70s at the time. The cave was actually the opening to a spring. Charlie had installed a pump, and this provided spring water for both he and his neighbors. I casually asked, "Have you ever heard any Indian stories?" And he said, "My entire life." He told me that just up the stairs led to his garden, and every time it rained, he found Indian artifacts. He found arrowheads and tools to make holes in buckskin, as well as stones to crush grains and scraping stones to prepare buckskins for tanning. I was absolutely in awe, like the little boy when I first heard the Indian treasure story. And then he said, "You can have these if you want. I've got plenty of them." To me, it was like solid gold bars. But he wasn't finished. He then asked, "Have you seen the Indian cave?" I told him I hadn't, but had been looking for it. Just down the road from his cabin, hidden up on the bluff, was what I'd been looking for. As soon as I found the very camouflaged entrance, I knew it was the one in William's picture. I peeked inside with my small flashlight, but knew I wasn't prepared. Despite my excitement, it would need to be another day. I humbly thanked Charlie for the artifacts and for showing me to the cave, and made plans to return with better equipment. When I did return, I still had a hard time finding it, as the cave was so well hidden. It had some graffiti on the outside, and even a styrofoam cup in the entryway. Again, this cave was no secret, but maybe I might find a clue or two. I could hear my heartbeat in the back of my head as I crouched down and entered the cave. The ceiling was low, around 4 feet tall, and about 3 feet wide, and it was clear I'd have to explore it bent over or crawling the entire way. There was a passage to a room at the right, but hundreds of little spiders were crawling out of it. I'd later hear a local legend that said John Dillinger hid in this cave, and in that larger room scratched a picture of a pistol on the wall. I instead moved forward, going through a very tight maze, feeling closed in and getting very muddy. There was another legend that said gangsters once burrowed down from the top of McBride's Bluff to a cave, and that allowed escape to the river. I would not doubt if this was that very cave. After going in a fair piece, all I could see was muddy walls. There were no symbols, no suspect places where treasure could be hidden. I decided I'd seen enough and turned around. Outside the cave, I felt like the Indian that had returned from out west. All he needed was a symbol carved into a tree, but that tree had been cut down, and he was clueless. I told an Indiana grotto member about my experience, and he showed me a map. He said, "You missed nothing but a long, muddy mess." I was left with one final clue. William and Lloyd found what looked like a treasure map, etched in rock, somewhere above the cave. When they found it, they wondered if it was made by French explorers or even Native Americans. They took a picture and spent an entire year trying to figure out what it meant. To them, it looked like an arrow and two diamonds. They thought that the line below was the river, and the short feathers pointed to the bluff's edge, while the long feathers toward a treasure. They converted the distance between the two diamonds into 4.5 survey chains, much like what was used in the 1700s and 1800s to complete land surveys. As a standard survey chain was 60 feet, it was 300 feet to the treasure. Going back to the mysterious map rock, William and Lloyd stepped off 300 feet and found an indention in the ground. It was unclear if something was once there and had already been taken, or an old wooden chest filled with treasure had collapsed. They never tried to dig it up. I tried contacting William Smith out in Arizona, but my letter came back with a forwarding address. But once I sent my letter to this one, it was neither returned nor received a response. I would not know the exact location of the mapstone. I can only imagine that the old McBride's Bluff explorer had passed from this life to a new adventure. I owed him a lot for getting me this far. I also owed a lot to Charlie for showing me the cave and giving me the artifacts. But when I visited the cabin, I found a padlock on the door. And when I did an online search, sadly, I found that he too had passed away. The first time I met him would be my last. I had reached the end of McBride's Bluff, but not the end of my journey by far. The clues that these two men had given me would only make sense with a few more. In the 1800s, a man living at Shoals, Indiana, named Absalom Fields, was approached by Indians. They said they wanted to show him something. Promising him no harm, they blindfolded him, turned him in circles to confuse and disorient, and then took him to their canoe. He had no idea which way the current was going, so had no sense of direction. Once the boat was landed on shore, he was walked a distance into the woods. When the blindfold was removed, he found himself in a dark cave among many Indians. He was shown piles of silver ore, but also crudely made silver ingots. They even gave him one. Apparently, the cave was filled with an impressive amount of silver, because after they returned him home, he spent most of his spare time trying to find this cave. Later on, After a long time of looking and exploring Martin County, Absalom saw one of these Indians that took him to the cave, and he begged the Indian for a clue. The Indian told him to stand on the big bluffs, looking away to the south, over the big bottom, and look down beneath. To me, in all I'd studied, that sounded very much like the area now known as the Bluffs of Beaver Bend. I crossed the bridge and headed south along the White River. I was looking for a landmark known as Spout Spring. If I could find that, it would lead me to the Bluffs of Beaver Bend, where tantalizing caves and legends awaited me. Little did I know is that my life would almost end there. If you're driving too fast, you will miss Spout Spring on your right. It looks like a small overhang with generations of graffiti. If you look up, you'll see signatures that go back well over 100 years. But they didn't get up there by climbing. The river has been so high that people would simply float their boat to the rock and sign their names. Both early pioneers and Native Americans before them came here to drink cool, refreshing spring water from deep within the earth. But I was here to turn right on a desolate old road and drink up the adventure of a lifetime. These are the Bluffs of Beaver Bend, an impressive outcrop of ancient Mansfield stone that goes up over 100 feet. And there are loads of caves to explore. It should go without saying that finding these caves are a lot easier in the fall when all the foliage is gone. And that's just what I did. I came back in the fall with better equipment, hoping to find any clue that might be left behind. The first cave, which I nicknamed Eye of the Needle, was a good 12 feet off the ground, and slippery mud was covered by dead leaves, concealing the danger. It was a genuine challenge to climb, and I ended up falling on my first attempt. I dropped a very expensive camera that bounced on the leaves below. It was a sign of things to come. Once inside, I found a vaulted ceiling, reminding me of the tombs of pharaohs in Egypt. There was even a shelf big enough for a body, but the cave wasn't very deep. For all the trouble I had climbing, it had not a single clue. The second cave, I nicknamed Bear Cave. I had tried to freehand climb it before, but found the way up very slippery and hazardous. But I came back well prepared and undeterred. Or so I thought. I didn't bring knee pads, gloves, ropes, or most importantly, a helmet. And that was almost my undoing. The ladder neatly sat on the lower ledge, and if I could make a final leap, I would be inside. The interior was a max 10 feet in length, but on the floor was what looked like jewels. These jewels were nothing more than decades of broken beer bottles. Overhead was a cathedral ceiling. There was enough room for 6 or so people. I could imagine Indians taking shelter from storms hundreds if not thousands of years ago. I didn't find a single clue from this exotic, ancient meeting place. And there was a mossy, slippery way down. When you're in your 20s, you feel invincible, have the stability of a mountain goat, and if you fall, you'll get over it. But I was now in my early 50s and was about to pay for forgetting who I was. I had no sooner taken one step, and both the ladder and I came crashing down. I bounced off the rock wall and landed on the ground below with a thud. By some miracle, I walked away with only a sore leg and back. Both would remind me how lucky I was over the next week. In the fall, it's easier to see details along the bluffs, like the signatures of early explorers and treasure hunters. Some are so old and weathered that you can barely make out what they say. But further down the bluff was an intriguing story and something I had wanted to see with my own eyes. All along this trail are large rock formations, and some of these are quite colorful. As the story goes, one man thought he saw gold flakes in the rock. He hired a group of men to dig a shaft to see if it would lead to a gold vein. This was literally a gold mine dug into the side of this bluff. During the summer, it's completely covered in foliage and easy to miss. Believe me, this was exactly what a 10-year-old boy wanted to find some 40 years earlier. This is just about as exotic as it gets. There's a brilliant green puddle of algae on the floor, created by a tiny waterfall above. The mine goes back about 20 feet or so and stops. As the story goes, after much expense and all the grueling work, no gold was ever found here. And now, this abandoned mine sits as a memorial to the legend of treasure and all the countless people that have tried to find it. But what did the Indian mean when he told Absalom Fields to look over Big Bottom and look down beneath? Did he mean to look at the base of the bluff? Or did he mean to look below the bluff, in the water? Other treasure hunters and explorers have pointed out the large bottom just south of the bluffs and that leads to Hindustan Falls. It was an area inhabited by Native Americans for thousands of years, going back to the time of the mound builders. Some believe that treasure lies hidden underneath the falls themselves in a small, hidden cave. But in times of low water, no one has ever found it if it's there. But perhaps the most telling story is of the Indians who arrived at Shoals in a train boxcar after living out west on their reservations. They jumped off the boxcar and disappeared into the woods, eluding curious people that tried to follow them. After some time, the Indians exited the woods, carrying something very large under heavy blankets. They caught another boxcar going west and were never seen again. Maybe there really was a grand treasure at Shoals, Indiana, and all of the stories were true. But perhaps the only treasure left is the rich history and tales told by many generations to one another. But as I left Shoals, I couldn't help but think that I'd missed something very, very important. It would take me some time, but I wasn't wrong. Having returned home, I took a long while to process all I'd learned. Beyond Shoals, there were no more Indian treasure stories or tales of lost Indian silver mines inside Indiana. It's not to say there weren't treasure stories west of Indiana, but the players were river pirates and bandits, such as those at Cave in Rock, Illinois. And beyond Illinois, Missouri also had treasure stories, but they weren't the same, even suggesting the treasure came from Egyptian pharaohs. Could it be that the Indian treasure simply moved west to the reservations, under blankets, and was made into jewelry never to be seen again? Was this truly the end of the Buffalo Trace, and this very long odyssey I'd taken for over 40 years? And then it hit me. I'd only traveled the Buffalo Trace west, but where did it go east? If I went the opposite direction, maybe I'd find the source of truth. I was propelled eastward into Kentucky toward a story that would unify everything I'd learned and breathed for most of my life. The Buffalo Trace went through Kentucky quite a piece. It was even part of a very well-known silver mine legend. It was certainly an eye-opener. I would learn about a key character in the silver mine legend, one that would tie up many loose ends. My first stop was at Wolfe County, Kentucky. It was here that a man named Jonathan Swift had camped with his men. While there are many legends about him, the primary one is that he found a large silver mine in Kentucky. There's even a statue of him on the courthouse lawn. His legend is a huge piece of local history. Sometime between 1761 and 1769, he and his men made numerous trips from the East Coast to here in Kentucky. While some stories paint him as just an old prospector, Others say he was a counterfeiter and used the silver to make counterfeit coins, some of which have been found here if you believe the rumors. However, other stories paint him as a bloodthirsty pirate that attacked ships on the high seas and stole their treasure. Some say he was the inspiration for the character Long John Silver in Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. And the Jonathan Swift name, nothing more but an alias, making it impossible to search his history. What's known is that he and his men camped in this area and along the nearby creek. Treasure hunters have been all over this place, digging and looking for clues. But silver, gold, and jewels are not common in Kentucky or Indiana. And while a silver mine could have happened, the cave might have been nothing more but a place to store stolen goods. It's also been said that the last of his men to travel with him to the cave ended up dead. They were rumored to have been murdered by Jonathan to conceal the location. When all these loose ends were wrapped up, it's said that he blasted the entrance to hide it. Before Jonathan Swift died, he created a detailed journal with cryptic clues telling where the mine was, just like the story of Nathan Phelps in Indiana. At Wolfe County, the legend is kept alive and well with the Swift Silver Mine Festival held here each Labor Day weekend. It's also rumored that nearby Clay County in the Red River Gorge Park area is where he walked into the woods and brought out silver. To get there requires entering the impressively long one-lane Nada Tunnel. It is certainly like going back in time, a portal to another era. When I was a kid and first heard of my great-grandma's treasure story, I would have never dreamed that it would take me here. And especially not through a tunnel that's reportedly haunted. This is a vast natural area with hundreds of miles of forest, caves, and natural arches. Not to mention, rattlesnakes and black bears are very common. If you want, you can even stay at the Jonathan Swift Historic Campground, where he once kept a base of operations. The rugged, primordial landscape captures your imagination. With hundreds of square miles, desolate valleys, and known caves, the mine could be anywhere. And yet, there's another story that says Indians found the cave and took its contents with them. Based upon the treasure stories that happened along the Buffalo Trace and what I'd learned along this adventure, the pieces of the puzzle came together. As I thought about my great-grandmother's story and what I'd learned along the road, the elements all came together at Shoals, Indiana. In the John Work story, the Indians took him on horseback from Charlestown, Indiana, on a journey that took a night and a day. From Charlestown to McBride's Bluff at Shoals, Indiana, is approximately 90 miles. It could absolutely be done in that time period. John Work mentioned crossing several waterways during the journey. Along the Buffalo Trace, he would have crossed both Blue River and White River. The Indian in the Absalom Field story said to stand on the big bluffs, looking away to the south, over Big Bottom, and look down beneath. If you were standing on the top of McBride's Bluff, looking south, you would be looking over a big bottom near the river. And if you were to look down beneath the bluff, you would find the cave that Charlie Pruitt and William Smith had helped me find. But 3 things in my great-grandmother's story remained unresolved. The first was how the 2 white people simply got off their horses and were walked to the cave. There was no mention of climbing. Also, that the plane they rode across sounded hollow. And there was a stone that was rolled in front of the secret cave, and I didn't see it anywhere. At first, these 3 things didn't seem to fit, but it was only because I hadn't seen the big picture. The area above Charlie Pruitt's cabin and above the cave is actually a vast plain. To get to the cave without climbing, you could cross the bottom from the south and enter the plain from the north using the natural incline. From the northern plain is a ledge that goes directly to the cave. But what about the plain sounding hollow? Well, the plain is directly above a large spring and the cave system itself. The bigger room that I didn't enter could have been where the dead Indians and treasure was, at least for a time. But where was the stone that was rolled in front of the cave to keep it hidden? The answer was at my feet. Below the cave, a large, rounded stone, almost perfectly the size of the cave opening, sat beside the road, as if it had fallen or had been pushed off the ledge in days gone by. Literally, all the pieces of my puzzle fit together. And over 40 years of dreaming, from the heart of a 10-year-old little boy to a nearly 54-year-old man, had become a reality. After all the miles and all the stories, I still hold out hope that maybe there's a hidden silver mine somewhere among the rolling hills of Indiana, and we just haven't found it yet. And someday, someone like me, but a whole lot younger, and with a full life ahead of them, may discover just the right clue, a symbol on an old rock, or a dusty old treasure map in the back of a library. And they'll find that treasure cave that leads to wealth beyond their wildest dreams. But something inside me tells me I found what I was supposed to find. I found my great-grandmother's treasure cave, high above the White River, the one I dreamed about finding since I was a little boy. It didn't make me rich with silver, gold, and jewels, but the adventure it sent me on enriched my life more than any of those things. Maya Angelou once said, "Life is not measured by the breaths you take, but by the moments that take your breath away." And for this man, in this lifetime, that's a pretty great bookend.